And this is why we have amazing colleagues who can press record. Good afternoon, everyone. We're so excited to see you again today. So many familiar faces. Love it. That always puts a smile on my face. We are here today for our last session of our EAD series. So this is so exciting. We have some amazing presenters joining us this afternoon, and my amazing colleague Patricia is dropping the landing site for today into the chat. So those of you who are new to these sessions, I'm Natasha Scott. I'm the Director of Educator Engagement at iCivics, and I am so happy that you are here with us today. And for our work together today, we always have a landing site. This isn't going to be an hour and a half of us talking at you, but we'll do a little talking, we'll do a little processing, and we're just going to have a lot of fun and a lot of great conversation and deep thinking. So I'm so excited that everyone is here today. And if you can go ahead and go onto that landing site, if you're just joining us, Patricia will keep popping that link into the chat for us today. And on our landing site, if you can, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. This is always the keeping fingers crossed. Do we pick the right screen? It's always a mystery. And there we go. Okay, so as you see, there we go. So as you see on our landing page for today, one of the aspects that I love, and my colleagues always giggle at my love of Padlets, but we will be using Padlets throughout today's session. Part of the reason, just to give you a space to jot down some thoughts and ideas. We're starting today with a map. This has been so much fun throughout these series, just to see where everyone is located. So if you're new to Padlet, all you have to do is click on the plus sign and tell us your location, and it'll add you to the map. And right below that today, go ahead and introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, where you're coming from, and our friends at Unum dropped in a question for today. If you could bring your students on a safe class trip backwards in time to a moment in our history that would help them better understand issues we face today, what historical moment would that be? And Sarah, not a problem that you are in the car. Enjoy the conversation. Whenever you can look at the landing site later, we'll send it in the follow-up and you can see everyone's thoughts and discussions.
And what safe class trip meant, because people have asked me that, is you know, if you were going to go to like the Battle of Gettysburg, I'm just letting you know you would not be bringing your students into a situation where, you know, harm would ensue. So you can go anywhere you want. You can go to the Battle of Bin Ja in Vietnam and still bring them back more enlightened.
Thank you, Don, for that explanation. And Don is one of our guests from Unum today, so we'll be hearing from him a little bit later. Thank you, Don. Okay, so we'll give everyone a moment. The other great thing about this Padlet space is it lets you engage at whatever depth that you desire. If you're just here to kind of listen to the conversation, that is perfectly fine. But if you're here to dive in, let us know who you are, where you are. It just gives you a little more time to stop and think. We know the chat can kind of sprint by and then you miss it. So I'm so excited for you to hear today. And one of the other aspects that I love about Padlet, even if we continue on with our slides, with our presentation, you can still add your thoughts and ideas at your own pace. So keep that in mind. And I am going to kind of shuffle my screen here just for a moment, bring you back to our slides. There we go. And as we dive into today's conversation, a couple of reminders before we get started. We have our, as I mentioned before, our landing space for today. We'll use that throughout the session. If you ever lose that link, don't worry, just ask for it in the chat. Patricia will help drop in the links and she is wonderful. And then those of you who just need documentation saying that you participated in today's webinar, please make sure that you are participating in the Padlets as well as the exit ticket at the end of the session. That's what we'll use just to confirm your participation and that you were here. And finally, as we're jumping into today's session, if you're on social media, you're finding something that you really enjoy, follow us, share it, just so that we can continue the conversation and continue to build the community of EAD. As we think of the work of EAD, it really is cutting across the country and engaging so many different individuals, as we could see from the map earlier today. And if we stretched out the map, I think we even have some people overseas from different sessions. So exciting. Now, those of you, I'd say we're kind of at a 70-30 split of brand new faces, and then those of you who have been here before. Those of you who have been here before to our sessions, while I'm going over the EAD overview, we know how we do that. As I go over the EAD overview, feel free to jump into the EAD website and start looking at that interactive roadmap. That's a great place for you to kind of poke around as you're hearing the overview, which by now you're really familiar with. And those of you who are brand new to us today, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about EAD, provide some overview, provide some context for today's discussion. Okay, so EAD, we're going to use that acronym throughout today's session. And when we say EAD, what we're talking about is Educating for American Democracy. As we're diving in, really important to know that this was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Department of Education. And it was led by Circle, iCivics, the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics, the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University, and the Jonathan Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. And as we think about this, we had this amazing core group really driving the work of the roadmap. But one of the most wonderful aspects of the roadmap is that it was built by a contribution of over 300 people, with content experts, with educators, people from across the field giving feedback and helping to create this. And as we think about what is the roadmap, so as we reference the roadmap, we'll talk about this roadmap, but it's understanding it's a guidance for civic and history education excellence. Okay, this is a framework that's really driving that. However, since the roadmap is a framework and not a curriculum or a mandate, it really provides states and districts that flexibility to use the roadmap to deliver excellent history and civic content that really leans into some of those essential discussions around topics like reflective patriotism. We're going to actually touch upon that today. And it also encourages the telling of America's plural yet shared story through a more complete and honest accounting of the past, both the good and the bad. And as we take a glance, in just a moment, we'll take a glance at the 7 themes. But before that, I do want to share just the core documents. When we talk about EAD, we have our EAD report, which contains the theory, the rationale, and the approach to the roadmap. Then we have the EAD roadmap itself, which contains 7 themes, which each set of those 7 themes are built across for the 4 grade spans, just so because this is K-12. And then finally, we have our Pedagogy Companion, which I know I'm a little biased towards because I love it, but really what that Pedagogy Companion does is describe the 6 core pedagogical principles, and we'll dive into an example of one of those principles a little bit later. Now, today's theme, we're exploring theme 7 of people with contemporary debates and possibilities. Now, when we look at the roadmap has so many questions because it's an inquiry framework, really having that base of questioning, wondering, and going deeper. So with inquiry at its core, the roadmap really provides those multiple layers of questions to guide conversation and instruction that gradually become more focused. So as you see, we start with our design challenges at the highest level, get a little more focused with our content themes, and then our driving questions and our sample guiding questions. Now, one of the aspects as we think about the EAD roadmap and how it connects history and civics, you'll see all of these layers of questions from the content themes, the driving questions, and the sample guiding questions, all from a history perspective as well as a civics perspective, really pushing us to think of how those 2 areas are interconnected. Now, as we think about these 5 design challenges, which are really one of the frames within the roadmap, they really encourage educators to lean into the tension that arises in history and civics instruction, rather than shying away from challenging concepts. So today we are diving into design challenge 5, balancing the concrete and the abstract. And so as we think about this, let's take a closer look at that question. How can we support instructors in helping students move between concrete and narrative and chronological learning and thematic and abstract or conceptual learning? And as we think about this theme 7, contemporary debates and possibility, thinking about how challenging it is for some of our students to toggle between the past and the present, but also the importance it is to make that connection back and forth. Now, alongside those design challenges, we have those 7 themes. Now, these 7 themes, if you haven't been with us for prior sessions, you should definitely explore some of the earlier videos. You'll be able to see there, we have one session on each of these themes. And today we are having our last session of our Goldman series and really focusing on that last theme. So as we think about these themes, each of these themes are organized across 4 grade bands and gradually dive into deeper concepts by anchoring each theme with 2 overarching questions, as we mentioned before, from that history and that civics lens. And really, when we think about these 7 content themes, they map out the disciplinary and conceptual terrain, as well as the skills and dispositional learning needed to support healthy civic participation. Okay. And as I mentioned before, we are going to be diving in to theme 7. And we're actually going to take a closer look at that now. And Nicole, great question. Access to earlier videos. We have an EAD channel on YouTube, and I bet Patricia will find it for us and drop it in the chat, but you'll be able to access the entire series there. So as we think about theme 7, people with contemporary debates and possibilities, really we're seeing how this theme connects that past and that present, really thinking about how civic participation and civic agency have that relationship between those historical narratives, as well as how those shape political events and arguments today. Okay, and seeing that relationship. And lots of times, if we're studying history, we are studying it in a fashion that we don't necessarily take the time to make those connections and grapple with those concepts. But as we think about that, we really want to make sure that we're pushing ourselves. And this is what this theme does. This theme pushes us to think about that connection between the past and the present. And as we think about the key concepts that are connected with this theme, what we can see is we can see where in K5, we're establishing this foundation in terms of understanding how we're exploring debates and perspectives and how we're setting that foundation both from our own and community and national histories and why they're important. And then in 612, we see that gradual progression where our students are really grappling between those concepts of different hard histories and contemporary debates. Okay, and thinking about how are they learning about current events and those issues and these debates, and really building that relationship and seeing that progression. So again, one of the aspects that I love about these design challenges and these themes is that they create the space for us to be able to think, to establish the foundation in K5 and really build up to deeper analysis and thinking in 912. Now, we're going to take a closer look. As I mentioned, we had our thematic questions, then we get a little bit deeper with our driving questions. Now, these driving questions, I believe I was able to fit most of them on the slide. If 1 or 2 are missing, it's just because I wanted to make sure you could read the font. We have to be realistic. But as we think about these driving questions, we can see how in K2, we're from a history perspective, thinking about why do people talk about the past? Why do we need to know about the past? Why do we tell stories about the past? Really setting that foundation and thinking about how learning about the past from a civics perspective really prepares our students to act in the present. Okay, and we can see how these questions in K2 are very basic, but establishing that foundation, because as they progress in 3.5, 6.8, and 9.12, we see how we're then going a little bit deeper in 3.5 and thinking about how do we evaluate and reflect on the actions of the people in the past. Okay, and starting to think a little more critically about our leaders in our communities and who's actually running for elected positions. Okay, think about how can we assess and challenge leaders when we see the need for change? Okay, and why do people running for office tell different stories about America? Okay, thinking about what we see during election, during different election periods, and how we start to have that conversation with our later elementary students. And then that gradually progresses into 6, 8, and 9, 12. And here you actually see some repetition of questions. What issues in current or local, state, or national or international decision-making are most important of interest to you? Okay, really encouraging our students to kind of stop, think, reflect. What matters to you? Why does it matter to you? Okay. And then as we get into 9, 12, seeing how here we're really getting into the deepest of the content, thinking about how can your learning from US history suggest strategies for how to address our shared contemporary problems? Thinking again, also, what specific methods have Americans developed for adapting or preserving society? And what are their strengths and limitations of each of these? Okay, as we look towards forward challenges in the future. Now, as we see this progression across K-12, okay, it's really continuing to set the foundation to get us to think a little bit deeper around these driving questions and how we can frame these inquiries in our classroom and not have it be a one-time experience, but actually constantly circling back to this concept of those contemporary debates and that relationship. Now, what I would love for you to do is actually to stop, do a little bit of thinking. If you look onto our landing site for today, and thank you for all of those who introduced yourself. Wonderful. And thank you for those of you who are back again. And scrolling down to section number 2 in terms of making those connections. And we have a couple of questions there, but thinking about how can the EAD roadmap deepen student understanding about the relationship between historical narratives and current political arguments. And as you hold on to this question, and there's also another question there, how can the EAD roadmap deepen student learning on how hard histories shape current policy debates? As you think and grapple with those questions, I'm not going to think that you remembered all of those driving questions. I'm actually going to go back to the other slide. I'll give you 2 minutes to go ahead, capture your thinking in response to those questions. And here I will bring us back to our driving questions. This is the wonderful thing about Zoom. You can just toggle back and forth and give people the space and the visual that they need. And I'm seeing some of you, while some of you are responding to those questions in the Padlet, I also see some of you joining us today for the first time. Wonderful to see you today. My amazing colleague, Patricia, will be dropping links into the chat. Please feel free to take advantage of them. And she'll also put in our landing site for today. And that landing site will give you the different spaces that we're engaging with. So as I'm referencing the landing site and Padlets, that's where you'll find them. And as you think about those connections, about how EAD can deepen student understanding, about the relationship between historical narratives and current political arguments, think about where you might need to strengthen that in your classroom instruction. Okay, think about if you have any opportunities like, I didn't think of framing the question this way. Okay, I see people making connections to SCOTUS interpretations, changes, movements, time, traditions. What principles do we keep? Wonderful questions there. Even just getting, I see someone writing, even just getting students thinking deeper about the past and the events. Some students may not even see that direct correlation. Allowing students to arrive at their own conclusions and think for themselves. I love that. I think that's one of the aspects with inquiry and with the roadmap is it creates that space for students to do that analysis, do that thinking, come to those conclusions, rather than just standing and lecturing at them. Excellent. Thinking about the stepping stones as your students are growing in ability and critical thinking skills, grade to grade, and even across your year, your school year, because these themes, you can definitely continue to loop them constantly back and forth. Okay, wonderful. Now I'm going to leave our Padlets there. Feel free to keep jotting down your thoughts and ideas. I am actually going to share one more slide. And welcome, Don and Carolee from Unum. So excited to have them here today. And I'm going to let them do a more formal introduction of themselves, but I'm so excited that they're here. And Anne, I will put that link back into the Padlet. Do not worry. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can go ahead and welcome them.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Natasha. So I'm Don. Carolee, say hi.
I'm Carolee.
And so this is, so I'm the executive producer of Unum, and I'll tell you a little bit about how we got started on that and my obsession with mixtapes as a metaphor for curation in a sec. Carolee, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I'm a producer on Unum. I have not worked in the education sphere directly, but I have been working for 2.5, 3 years with the PBS Learning Media, Ken Burns in the Classroom team. We're really focused on trying to develop content that's really useful for teachers on the ground, and pivoting towards inquiry-based work. We're very happy, Unum, to be one of the EAD champions. Very honored, so we're among a good crowd. Yeah, take it away, Don.
Awesome. So yeah, so I think I mean, I don't know, I looked through some of the other entities, you know, I think as Carolee was just saying, like, I think we're different than the other ones. And I think, you know, Unum is unique, and it's really valuable for us to get to talk to you because it's not like Unum was created specifically for use in the classroom. It really came out of a vision and a real passion that Ken had that I'll talk about in a second. And I think it really reflects kind of his unique way of, you know, he would say, I'm not a historian, I'm a storyteller, I'm a filmmaker. You know, and similarly, I think he doesn't, you know, he's not a teacher, an educator, he's a filmmaker. And yet, you know, the films he's made have been used in classrooms. You know, my daughter certainly saw, you know, I was just not checking off all the films that she was shown through her middle and high school years. So, you know, I think what I wanted to, I guess I'd love to, and so it's incredibly valuable for us to be here, and thanks. And I love that if you scroll at the bottom to the bottom of any page on the EAD website, Unum is right there out of many one. And, you know, that did not take long for Ken to come up with that as the name for Unum. So, you know, I think giving you a sense of, I just wanted to start giving you a sense of where Unum came from. And then I'll give you a quick walkthrough, and then we'll look at something together that, you know, really does speak to the theme of the day of making, you know, helping inform the way we think about the present by stepping into the past. And you know, I think Unum is all about making those connections. That was really the driver for Ken in creating it. I met Ken 23 years ago. I just figured it out before we got on here. So I've spent my life in curation and discovery of culture, helping people get beyond what they might not otherwise know. I created a company called Hear Music that was the first music stores with listening stations. I sold it to Starbucks. I ended up, so if you remember the little CDs, the mixtapes you would get at Starbucks, that was my team that created those. So I would interview Yo-Yo Ma about how to get into classical music, or I interviewed the Rolling Stones on how to get into Delta blues. And and that's when I met Ken. He called up and said, I've just made this film, Jazz. And so that's when I first met him, and we became friends for life. And we were, some years later, we were sitting together, and I forget what film he was coming out with, but he said, you know, PBS is going to make another website for whatever the new film was. And he was like, I just feel like they just keep making individual websites and there's no connection across the websites. You know, there's no, I have no ability to make connections across the films. And he said, I see so many patterns that run through all of American history. And I, you know, at that point, he had probably made 30 films. He's now made, I don't know, maybe Carolee knows, 42 or something.
40, yeah.
It's crazy. And so he was saying, like, God, I wish there was some way for me to make those connections across my films, trace the themes that are running through American history and trace them to today, right? Because those are issues that we're still continuing to face. And, you know, I think, so it came out of that wanting to make connections across the films. And then secondly, as you were just talking about, feeling like we're at a place where we are so locked up in the present in sort of binary oppositions around topics and issues. And that one way to help unlock that is to help people step into the antechamber of our shared past, understand that we have been here, you know, we've been here before, and that so that when we return to the present, we can see the contemporary discussion with a more nuanced point of view. And for Ken, that wasn't just to happen in an 8th grade classroom or a 6th grade classroom. That was to happen for everyone. You know, he thinks broadly. But so that led to the creation of Unum in a special way. And I talked about sort of the mixtape a minute ago. I was the kid in high school who made mixtapes. And what I love about mixtapes as a format is, if I make you a mixtape, I don't just, you know, like there are kids now that just send people Spotify playlists with nothing, like, which is terrible, right? If what a mixtape was, you came up with a compelling theme for it, right? That helped people get curious. And then you wrote on the little cardboard foldout with your little Uniball Micro Black 0.5 millimeter, you wrote what they should, how they should, what the song was and how they should listen to it, and gave it some context and gave a connection to the theme. And so I really believe in that and have done it in different metaphors. And so for me, it was like, well, what if you could mixtape, well, Ken Burns, what if you, Mr. Funny Haircut, what if you could mixtape American history via the moments that are in these incredible films that you've made? And that was really the kind of initial insight. You know, I think to be able to create one on protest and one on innovation and one on leadership, and to be able to pull these together. And we started by creating an iPad app because it was 2013 and that's what one did. But we wanted to make it something that everyone could enjoy. And so that's how we created the Unum website. David Rubenstein, the amazing supporter of many different incredible things around, I think, you know, anyway, is the benefactor who made Unum possible, and it's great. So that's kind of the spirit behind it. You know, you talked about the abstract and the concrete there a minute ago, Natasha, and you know, I'm a real believer in that as sort of, you know, another thing I did was I helped Bono create Product Red, which was his organization to fight AIDS in Africa. And that was it was a money, we raised $500 million for ARVs, but it was an awareness campaign. And the way you had to do it was, we literally talked about it that way. We said, we need to give you a story that helps you understand the human impact of the problem, tell you about this person, but then you have to go back and go, there's 25 million people in Africa that are having this problem, right? So you have to keep, we called it the two ends of the telescope. And I think if you think about a Ken Burns clip, like a moment in a Ken Burns film, it has like a tripartite structure. The first thing it does is you'll hear kind of the voice of God. It's usually Peter Coyote or Jason Robards or whoever saying, you know, when FDR was inaugurated, the banks were closed, right? And, you know, gives you that quick voice of God overview. Then you get FDR standing there going, the only thing we have to fear, right? So then we get this part 2 is actual archival footage. And then part 3 is John Meacham or, you know, Wynton Marsalis or whoever it is coming in after that to help have one person synthesize and provide a perspective, right? His films are not prescriptive, but they are proscriptive. You guys are educators, you could tell me. But they are sort of that structure, I think, is a really powerful educational technique. And it gets repeated throughout the films. And so the idea was to sort of like, let's go curate. The first piece was let's curate out those incredible moments. Then let's restitch them together into these mixtapes around themes. And then let's create new ways to sort of explore and discover. So that was part 1. So I'm going to share my screen and just give you a quick tour. How are we doing? Is everybody okay? Okay. Hi, Carolee. All right. So I'm going to not hopefully share the wrong screen, as one does. Okay. Okay. Do you see Billie Holiday? Good. And Jackie Robinson. So this is Unum. It's a website. It's free. Anybody can go on it. It's here for everyone to enjoy. This is Ken welcoming you and explaining you things that I'm explaining to you now. I'm going to skip past some stuff. So the first part I told you is like, step 1 was let's organize into themes. Debate and diplomacy and communication were both National History Day themes. We'll talk about those in a minute. Housing inequality, elections, collective mobilization is one we did in the beginning of the pandemic in like March of 2020. Looking back at World War II, but other moments where we've mobilized. Protest is a really beautiful one. Innovation, leadership, art. So all of these are pulling us into a place. I'm just going to jump into hard times because I thought I would just cheer you up because it's the last day. So why not jump into hard times? So here's hard times. As you come down, you get an introduction from Ken, like a good mixtape. Ken Burns is there. So I'm not going to play very much of this, but just to give you a little sense of it.
What if I said, during the Great Depression, in some cities, animals in the zoo were shot and meat distributed to the poor? What if we use that as the definition of depression?
So he's sort of trying to put the depression in. Can you guys hear that when I do that? Or is that just like terrible use of Zoom and video in 2022? Okay, all right. So you get Ken talking specifically about the Great Depression, and then you start pulling from films, right? And if I asked you all to name 5 Ken Burns films, well, you guys are a very special group. So some of you would probably have said Huey Long, but not many people would have said Huey Long. But it's a really amazing film. And this, I'm not going to play it, but this moment, it starts off with him giving a speech about how 4% of the American people own 85% of the wealth, and 70% of them don't own enough to pay the debt they have, right? Which is certainly something that speaks, you know, to the current world. Then you go, so that's Huey Long. Then a short clip from his film on Prohibition, from when, from the beginning of the Depression there, to what happened with baseball, from the film Baseball, to obviously his film The Dust Bowl. I think we would have thought would come here. And then you jump into, and they're chapterized. So you have resilience. There's a beautiful little thing over here you can do to jump ahead and sort of see how it's structured. But you get FDR's fireside chats from his film Empire of the Air, which again is one of my favorite films he's ever made that not enough people have seen. And then the New Deal. And so part 1 is we're organizing these, but part 2 is we're allowing Ken to come in and set the table on these. I'm not gonna play this,
Roosevelt,
but this is Ken speaking and setting up the clip as if you had gone to an event where he was playing you a mixtape, and these are his little ways of writing. Jazz, this is the 1938 first jazz festival in America. And obviously the war town from the war. So that's just a quick look at one way of sort of making those connections across the films. And I think to just show you really quickly, another way that we sort of enhance those mixtapes is, this is Housing Inequality. There was a film that he made called East Lake Meadows. And this brings through clips, but it's also, pulling in quotes from, and the ability to, this is about redlining, to then have the ability to go through the primary sources. So when you are, so that you get a real ability to kind of not just see clips from the films, but to have other ways of exploring it. Down here, we're going to have a podcast episode. So really trying to create like a multimedia mixtape experience. And then I think the next one I want to show you is communication. So if we say like step one was let's organize clips together. Step two, let's add Ken to add his voice and associate additional content. Step three was let's bring in other voices to bring their own reflection. So you have essentially, a conversation happening around the hearth of each clip. So this is communication, which many of you probably know was a theme for National History Day, which we do a playlist for each theme in National History Day, and we'll introduce it. There's a great, again, setting up the thing from Ken, and then we go through elements of it. So broadcasting, this is one of my favorite clips. It's sort of talking about this moment was the first moment where one person could speak to many, right? The creation of radio. When I asked Ira Glass of This American Life to give a reflection on this, he wrote back to me and said, well, Gutenberg. So everybody has to quibble, but the printing press was one to many. But so here is Yamiche Alcindor from then PBS NewsHour reflecting on that clip and what it means to her about broadcasting. Then as we come down, we get to fireside chats, which we saw earlier is this amazing moment of presidents talking directly to the voters, to the people. And it's a really beautiful thing, again, from Empire of the Air. Now we live in a world of Twitter where presidents for good and bad are able to speak directly to folks, right? And so it's interesting to have David Axelrod, who was senior advisor to a president, then reflect not on Obama, but on that moment in presidential history and how it affected how we went through the Depression and how we went through the war. James Fallows. I'm just going to zoom along. There's literature and change from his film on Mark Twain. And here's Carla Hayden, Library of Congress, talking about the banning of books and reflecting on that specific clip. And then, as Carolee said, here's an ability to jump into Ken Burns in the Classroom, who has created an entire set of just bespoke educational materials and curriculum to support this clip. So that's just a quick, and then my favorite, and then we'll move on. Well, Pentagon Papers is great. Jane Mayer from the New Yorker talks about how she was in high school, and I'll just play the very beginning.
In 1971, when the Pentagon Papers were published, I have to admit, I was in high school and I really didn't understand too much about what all the fuss was about. But that event in history in many ways changed my life. And so
you get this really personal reflection on that, that I think can be relatable to a wide group. This is Megan Toohey. And then you can, of course, link to the National Archives to see the documents themselves. Propaganda, the Anti-Saloon League, clip on that from Prohibition. And here's Kara Swisher with Kara Swisher hair going to quickly reflect on it, and I'll just play a little bit of this. Because I think it's interesting from a context of kids in the world of Instagram and the Anti-Saloon League and propaganda.
Carol Swisher, I'm commenting on the Anti-Saloon League. I had no idea it existed. I'd heard different temperance movements and things like that, but it was really interesting to me is how they sort of used the technologies of the day to create a movement in that way and put out pretty effective propaganda to convince people. When I think about a lot of things about what's going on today, misinformation and disinformation and hate speech especially, one of the things that I think about a lot is that movements like this, or even more malevolent ones like Nazism and others, they didn't need Instagram to do well. They didn't need social media. Mussolini did not have Reddit and things like that.
That's my line. Mussolini did not have Reddit. It's a pretty amazing line. So it's those kinds of connections that we're trying to show how we're trying to have sort of model the making of connections from the past to the future, to the present in that way. So that's a quick look at, I know you're getting a lot of tour there, but that's a quick look at sort of the themes. Then you get to go through events, Emancipation, Watergate, the Kent State shootings, which we have John Legend reflecting on, and Pearl Harbor and Gettysburg. We have Unum Voices, which is sort of what I was talking about happening in that communications playlist. John Legend's father was actually working at Kent State, in the Ohio State National Guard when Kent State happened. He wasn't actually there. John Batiste talking about Duke Ellington, John Green talking about Mark Twain, Bill McKibben talking about John Muir. And then the ability to see people as they appear across the different films. Eleanor is in many of the films. We put this together for students that are doing AP US history. These are playlists specifically allowing you to explore the themes from the AP US history exam through the films. The wars, Ken has a lot on wars, the places, and times. I think really that Ken's point to me in the very beginning was, I've been in the 1930s and the 1920s many times, but you never step in the same river twice. So I think that's a quick look at Unum, and at the core part of Unum. Carolee, do you want to talk really quickly about sort of the chats and the conversations that we have, which I realize is actually right here?
Sure. So obviously Unum at its most essential is pulling clips from films and sort of recontextualizing them and putting in, as Don has said, reframing them with introductions and voices. But we recognize that there's also a lot to be gained from conversation. We had an event at Georgetown, which was like a live event in which we played a playlist essentially, and professors then sat and discussed the content. And it was such a compelling, it was on immigration, right, Don?
Yep.
It was so compelling, and it really sparked an idea. So we followed up with that. We have since had the conversation between Ken and Heather Cox Richardson, very on brand for the EAD roadmap. It's the discussion of how the GOP has changed over time. So if any of you are familiar with Heather Cox Richardson, she's incredibly thoughtful and well-informed and just quick. It's really worth checking out. We've sort of built a design where we're looking at clips and moments from the films, and she's adding that context. We have done other chats. John Avalon had a book recently come out about Abraham Lincoln, and on a similar note to the EAD roadmap, he flags in a conversation with Ken about how when visiting a hospital during the Civil War, a veterans hospital, or not a veterans hospital, forgive me, a field hospital, Abraham Lincoln specifically asked to see the Confederate injured because they were the people he most wanted to speak to. So when we're thinking about civics and thinking about division, there are role models, there are people to think about. They also talk about how Lincoln isn't all, pure and good. It's just very interesting. And as you can see, there's a whole breadth of coverage there. Phenomenal.
And at the Georgetown event on immigration, one of the cool things was Alexander and Yevgeny Vindman were there because they were actually when they were 7 years old, they were in Ken's film on the Statue of Liberty. He was walking along the boardwalk in Brighton Beach, walking up to random people on the boardwalk saying, "What does liberty mean to you?" And he asked these two 8-year-old kids who turned out to be Alexander Vindman. And so he was at that event. So let me jump quickly at just the last part of it I want to show you is shorts. And the idea, so if you think about what we've done, we've created an experience on the site that allows you to explore American history in a new way through kind of Ken's lens. But then we wanted a way to be able, we kept sort of saying like, hey, everybody, come over here and explore it. So we wanted to create space probes that could go out and kind of enact Unum. And Ken, so this is where, Ken is a long form filmmaker, right? He doesn't, you think, so a Ken Burns short is sort of the ultimate oxymoron, but he really liked this idea that he could say, today I want to share a moment with you from our past that was captured in one of our films. And I want to tell you why it's relevant to now. So literally trying to be delivering on the EAD, he wants to be as on brand as possible. And so we've done this series of shorts. You'll have the link, you can watch Ken sort of explain where the shorts come from. I'm going to scroll down. The first one we did was on that moment in the Tennessee State House when the vote, because Harry Burns had a letter from his mother, was ratified. I can't see who you are, but you're smiling about it. So I think there's recognition out there in Zoom land. But tying that to how difficult it is to ratify an amendment and where the Equal Rights Amendment stands today. And that we put together, and then the New York Times put it out, right? So I think this idea of sort of having kind of booster rockets on it. This is the collective mobilization one. We did one on When the World Couldn't Watch a Black Man Win, focused on Jack Johnson and when they had to stop the fight because he was going to win, he was going to beat a white man. And they had to throw blankets over the cameras and because no one could see it. But then how that relates to how sports serve as a mirror of our culture. If you watch one short other than the one we're going to show you tonight, I would ask you to watch this one, which is the Mythology of Monuments. In his film, The Statue of Liberty, which really not enough people have seen, more have seen probably than Huey Long, but a lot of it is Mario Cuomo and different people talking about how wonderful the Statue of Liberty is and how great, America is. And then he has this interview with James Baldwin. And James Baldwin was teaching at a college here and agreed to have this young whippersnapper filmmaker interview him. And Ken set up the room across the hall, in the classroom across the hall from where he was teaching his class. And while he was waiting for him, he wrote on the board the beginning of the Declaration of Independence. And Baldwin comes in and Ken doesn't say anything. He just goes, "What is liberty?" And so the cold open of this is James Baldwin a little perplexed on what to answer. And you see him look over Ken's shoulder and read from the blackboard the answer, but then say amazing things. And what he ultimately does is say, the Statue of Liberty is for Black people in America a bitter and cruel joke. And that is then Ken connects that to our discussions of sort of monuments in memory and how we talk about this Confederate monuments now. There's lots of them here. The one we wanted to show you, I think it was hard to pick. As you can see, I wanted to show you Baldwin, but instead I took the time it would have taken to watch it to tell you what was in it. This one is important because it has a really great line in it where Ken says, how we talk about history is also or how we remember history is also history, or he probably says it better than I'm saying it. But that this is the Sand Creek Massacre is the only national park entity that has the word massacre in its name. So why don't, this really speaks to, I think, this notion of reflective patriotism. You know, how do we balance patriotism with being critical of where we've been and what we've done, and where we're going. So I think our idea right now, Natasha, I'm looking at you. Do we?
Sure, I can take over from here, Don, for this portion. So what we're going to do is we are actually going to put you into breakout rooms, and for just a few minutes, we're going to give you enough time to watch the video, as well as watch the video independently. We know sometimes when we play them over the Zoom, they get a little choppy. So we're actually, if you're on the landing site for today in section number 3, you'll see the link there, Unum Short, Remembering the Sand Creek Massacre, as well as the small group discussion document that Patricia put into the chat. So what we're going to do is we are going to give you time to watch that short, have a little bit of a conversation. The discussion notes, the discussion document there is to have just capture the conversation that's going on in your group. If you have one person type, if multiple people type, wonderful. And then we are going to come, it's not going to be tremendously long because we are going to come back together and continue our discussion today. So we'll probably come back at about 8:07. I'm going to be very precise here tonight. 8:07. So that'll give you enough time. Watch the clip, talk about a little bit, and then we'll come back together. Okay. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. But otherwise, you should have the link to grab the link right now to the Sand Creek Massacre. You're going to watch that independently while we put you into breakout rooms. Okay. I hope you enjoy the short and enjoy the conversation. Recording again as we wait for everyone to join us. And looking in your graphic organizer, I really appreciate your thoughtfulness in terms of what you observed within the short that you watched together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back. As there's always a moment of like, oh, back. And I get to see all your faces for just a moment before you turn it off again. I saw you all. Welcome back, everybody.
No, we like seeing the faces.
So thank you for sharing your thoughts and ideas and capturing that discussion there. And I've already seen some of you jotting down some of your bigger thinking in terms of Unum on that final Padlet. And I just want to thank Dawn and Carly for being here today. So excited for sharing Unum with us. And now I'm actually going to introduce Carolee, because Carolee is going to kind of think about how you actually do this in the classroom and give us that classroom perspective. So Carolee, I'm going to turn it over to you. You should be able to share your screen.
Oh, good, I found it.
This is always the mystery, especially in mid-June.
I was looking for the tab. Yes, do we see my screen?
It is starting to load. So it's
Yay.
There we go. We see it now. Wonderful.
Yay. All right. So hi, I'm Carolee Wong, Nakazuka. I'm so thrilled to be here. It was such an honor to be with Don and Carly. I love Unum. I just met Unum yesterday. Now it's my new best friend. I'll have to put it on my website. And Natasha, I can't say no to her. And I love talking about civics and government and history and all that good stuff. So we're going to start with, I teach in Southern California. I've been teaching since 1990 when I was 5. And I started when I was teaching when I was 5. That was a joke. So I want just to look at this picture and what do you see, think, wonder. So you can go ahead, go in the chat and just put what you see, think, wonder. If I'm talented, I can read the chat. Okay. Anything. I won't be offended by anything you say. So what do you see? Observations. What do you think about what you see? Any questions that you have about it? Okay, final project, steps to learning. The kids are being super creative. Kindergarten art. Where did he get that 6 shark video? Yes. Baby shark collaboration. It's adorable. Kids are out to do that. 2 adorable kids, creative, hands-on smiles, caught red-handed, kids having fun. Wonder what they're painting. Joy and hands-on. You are all amazing. It's like late on the East Coast. I'm on the West Coast, and you're like spot on and awesome. Love it. Thank you. Okay. And I'm going to tell you nothing, and we're going to go on. So we're talking about educating America for democracy, and we're talking about the roadmap and like, how do we do it? And that's what I'm here to talk about. How does it happen in the classroom? So I love history. History is awesome. I've been doing history for a long time, and that's part of our roadmap. And we're talking about how does the past inform our present? How does the past activate our civics muscle to get involved with issues, etc. And Ken Burns, you may have heard him recently, said that history influences how we think about our world right now. Totally agree with that. I also that students don't care. So here's a quote: students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, which I agree. But I'm not sure if it was my principal or I who also said, students don't care to know unless they know you care. And I'm a firm believer in that. So I put Jeff Wilson because I'm not sure if he said it or if I said it or we both said it, but I totally believe that. And so before we can get to the history, before we can see how the past informs our present, we have to connect with our students. So community is a real big deal. It's a pet peeve of mine when people talk about civics and civics engagement, which I love, which is really important. But we have to start before we connect our kids to history, before we connect kids to the present, before we kick our kids to the future and to their engaging their civic muscle, we have to connect with them. And so we do that in community. Oops, this one didn't update. So social emotional learning is super important to that. And that helps us to connect with the kids, maintain these relationships. It's about equity and everything, helping the kids to see themselves. And that helps to lead to the success to building this community and connecting with history. So if you know Castle, yeah.
Sorry, can you, sorry to interrupt you. Can you pause just for a moment, and can you clear the paints on the screen?
How do I clear?
So if you look at the top in your control bar, you should see where the writing is happening.
I stop sharing?
Yeah, stop sharing and reshare. Sorry, everybody. We wanted to make sure we get the nice clean pictures as Carolee's sharing. And just reshare your screen. Thank you, Carolee.
No worries.
I thought they were cool.
I like really talented. Okay, let me share again. Loading. Don't you love technology?
This is always when it's wonderful. And then you get
Technology
the
is
side
wonderful.
conversation. You get the side conversations.
And you get to hang out with everyone. Okay. Yay, that looks right. Actually, it helped I updated my slide. So thanks. Yeah, so SEL is a process through which all young people acquire and apply knowledge, skills, and adults skills and attitudes, and it just develops. They just become healthy, whole people. It's about equity and excellence and all that stuff. So SEL is really important, really vital, and sometimes left out. The Council of 5 talks about social emotional learning, looks at these 5 areas, and I can't say enough about it. And this is an integral part of my classroom, but it hasn't always in my over 30 years. And there's, of course, it's not just Carolee just talking and talking about fun things anecdotally, but there's research behind all of this. And you can all go look it up after we're done talking. And this is also about building an EAD ready classroom and school and educating for American democracy. Pedagogical principle number 3. Everything's like merging together. So this is about to create this EAD ready classroom and school. It's involving all the stakeholders. It's partnering with the students, the teachers, administrators, families, the community, everything, so that we tell this multifaceted story of American history using UNAM and other resources, getting the kids to take ownership in this, responsibility to see themselves to see them, this inclusive story and history of people who look like them, people who don't look like them, so they know this is what America is, this inclusive, colorful place where we don't look, we look all different ways, and it's awesome. So how do I do this community in my classroom? I have community circles every week. And this year, for well, kind of still pandemic, I actually had I'm a history teacher. I don't have a standardized test. So I have a little leeway with my time. And so I took the whole entire period every Thursday to spend in community with my students. I don't always do that, but that was what we needed this year. And looking at the kids' reflections, it was the right decision. But it was a sacrifice of time, and I was scrambling a lot for content, but it was worth it. So here they are talking to each other. It's just awesome. They love circles. I'm like, if there's circles was Thursday, they knew it. If they came in the classroom and the desk was not set up for circles, they were so disappointed. And when they leave their backpack outside the door, they're so happy. It's pretty amazing, and they're jaded 8th graders. And they're even willing to say, like, I love circles. That's really awesome. And so, yeah, so my friend coach says, yay, we get into circles. That's totally my students. And this year so I'm always learning, always growing, know better, do better. This year we really were intentional about using the CASTLE framework to connect with our kids and help to inform our circles. So it wasn't just hanging out and having a good time, but we were really methodical about how we did that to connect with them and help them to, look at their work on their identity and self-awareness and relationships and everything. And I told them, we're here to be human together. We're here to learn to be human together, to be respectful to each other, to be empathetic and everything. And this is our little community that we're learning to do this. And we play games, like we mix them up. And there's some kids who like stuck next to each other. They travel together, they're totally cheating on the mix-up games. And I had to give them a little scolding. I'm like, look, this is a safe place we have here. I'm sending you to the high school. And there might be people you don't know. There might be people you don't like. You have to take a safe risk here and sit next to someone you don't know and talk to them. And it did help. And I said, I'm going to have to talk to people. I'm going to have to go to conferences this summer, and I'm going to have to talk to people I don't know. And so I'm going to take this risk, and you need to too. You need to speak up and use your voice, because if you don't, people are going to speak up for you and make assumptions. So history influences, Ken Burns said, history influences how we think about our world right now. Our goal is to magnify our shared experiences. So building community creates this shared experience. And so after we build this community, after we connect with each other, we get into the history. And what kind of history did we talk about? We need to show a representative history, an inclusive history where they can see themselves in history. I don't think I ever really saw myself in history. And as a result, I've been quiet and timid in history spaces the majority of my life. I know you look at me now, you don't believe it, but yes. And so this shows you what representation can do. And just think about if we show our kids themselves in history and others who don't look like them, so we know that everyone is awesome and does different things. They don't have to look like me to do stuff that's cool. They can not look like me. Think what can happen for our kids. And that's my why. That's why I do what I do. So we hear about culturally responsive teaching all the time. It is a game changer. Learning about voting, it was always Susan B. Anthony. But then I learned about Maple Pink Wally as an adult, someone who looked like me, who rode a horse and was really cool and did more than just ride the horse. People love that she rode a horse, working for suffrage. Like, how amazing is that? So hearing these stories, and I'm plenty old, but I was excited about that. And so look, if we give students these stories, what just the opportunities, the potentials, and everything is just amazing. So we got to keep doing it. And because I've gotten my history voice, gotten my history confidence, I've learned to ask questions. And so I've invited, besides telling inclusive history and keep on, know better, do better, getting to know our history, sharing with my students. Yes, we do that. But also I have a great community. And so I've invited the community that my students are in, I've invited the community into my classroom. And people, you just ask and they say yes. So I've spent the majority of my teaching not asking now. I'm just asking everyone. Oh, Natasha, when are you going to come talk to my classes? And Don and Carolee. So they come and they talk to these kids until these kids like, hey, look at these cool people from my community are talking to me. This person right here, Mr. Ng, he's a school board member. He teaches all the kids Kung Fu. And he came and told his family's Chinese immigration story. and they were Chinese from China, and they came through Ellis Island, which was like wild and awesome. And they love him because he's the cool Kung Fu guy, but they also got to find out who he was. So we look at that, taking that empathetic look at history and seeing someone who looks like them. 70% of my kids are Asian. Someone who looks like them telling the story is really, really powerful. And I could go on. The Constitution lady, Linda Mock, is my friend too. And we became friends over Twitter. We're real friends too. April Vallado, she was a mayor before. She came to my class for city council, talking to them about, hey, this is how you can get involved. This is how you can express your concerns to your city council. It's all amazing, the people. And then, so I had local people, and then the silver lining of pandemic teaching is that we learned that we don't have to be confined to the four walls of our classroom. We can push it out. And so I had a virtual summit for my students, and I invited people from my world, but outside of theirs, and mostly from out of state, to come in and talk to them about what does it mean? What does the me in the we of we the people mean? What does it mean to be a citizen? What does it look like? And it was awesome. Dr. Emma Humphreys from iCivics, she came, my editor of my book, all these friends came and spoke to my kids, and it was amazing. And eighth graders were so fun. They'll ask you questions, they ask questions like, why do you speak so smart? Why do you use such big words? Which was really great. But also, like, you know, what do you do as a citizen? How do you know, what does that look like? So it was really awesome. So representation, how we remember history is also a part of our history. Yes. And totally agree. So I had a student, I'm gonna give you a moment to read this. This is just one quote of many, and it's just a sentiment that was echoed by lots of my different students. And so this is a student who, Chinese American student, full of great potential and never felt connected to her history. And so so how many years of her education, she never felt connected to history. And now coming to my class, she has that connection. And I told her, I'm like, I want to follow you. I want to see where you're going to go. I gave her an Asian American novel to read, and it's so exciting. And I've already heard her starting to use her voice and starting to ask questions. And that's just exciting. So I brought it back. So this picture was actually a tweet written by New Jersey Congressman Andy Kim from New Jersey. And if you followed anything happen on January 7th, he was cleaning up the Capitol wearing his blue suit. And so this is his son's, and he tweeted a really awesome thread. If you're on Twitter, go look at it. And he said, I'm with the president. He's telling his kids, I'm with the president signing this bill with leading the path towards a national Asian Pacific American museum. That's super amazing. He said the only thing that Asians have is the one to Japanese incarceration. So that's not a happy thing. And for me, that's super exciting to think that I could take my kids. Well, I mean, I don't know how long I know it takes a long time. So I don't think for my kids, they're getting kind of old, but I could take my grandkids to a museum where they can see themselves in Washington, D.C. That's super, super exciting. And so I just love this quote. This paper has a lot of words, but what it really says to my son and all AAPs is, you belong here. Like that's like, take out the Kleenex. That's amazing. So history, community matters, representation matters, historical empathy, taking an empathetic look at the past, seeing ourselves as part of the we and we the people. That's how we educate America for democracy. So I found out, someone told me that I'm allowed to quote myself since I wrote a book. We in education have the unique opportunity to create a sense of belonging and shared common interests in our classroom communities, and to create a safe space for students to participate and form positive student relationships. It starts in the classroom, it goes beyond. The potential is amazing and unlimited. So thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Carolee. And I think you've just done an amazing job kind of giving us the rationale of why you need to create this community before you dive into some of this really rich content, right? Getting to know your students as you're connecting the past to the present. We did have a question in the chat for you, Carolee. If you could tell us how, and we have only a couple of minutes, but one, I'm going to ask if you can share a link with us, but also if you could just tell us how you talk about your circles and how do you structure them, and if you have any resources about incorporating circles into the classroom that you could share.
I will when my book publishes, but the hardest thing about circles is setting up the circle in your classroom. So there was a point where we ran to the library and it wasn't easy because you had break and you had lunch and you had to keep on breaking out. But because the kids value circles so much, they'll do it. So we literally hauled tables with no wheels and moved them over and made circles in the library and put it back to go back to lunch and came back after lunch and did it again. So it was a big old pain. But then it's nice to be in your classroom. And so we figured out how to stack chairs and we flip. If you look me up on Twitter, even if you're not on Twitter, you can look me up. Not saying I'm amazing or whatever, but at History Frog and then hashtag History Frog class. You can see some of the stuff. So we flip the desk over and we make a circle, so it works. And so a circle is not supposed to have to take up the whole class time. Circle, but it's consistency. Have it every week with hardly any exceptions, 15-20 minutes, and then the rest of your class teach it in the circle that day. So do your content in the circle, but have your circle time where you have a mix it up game, have some question. I like to have check-ins. How are you doing 1 through 5? And then a game if you have time. Well, actually, yeah, you have a game. You have a mix-up game and then have a game. The kids love it. My kids were so good by second semester, they led my circles. So if I wanted to cover something, I would take care of like the question part, but they would love it. And I told them like, okay, no musical chairs, that's dangerous. But I had to step out for a moment. I came back, they were playing musical chairs and it was great. And one kid's handling Alexa to do the music and everything like that. So, and circles are really great to check in, like, how are you feeling? And you're getting ready for high school. How are you feeling about high school? And they found out they were anxious. I invited the high school counselor and she came and talked to them and we got their questions and inviting, other people. We had a learning walk and the superintendent came in and he was part of our circles. It's a really great way to show off your classroom too, to invite people to come into your classroom and to talk to your kids. You talk about student agency circles. I love being just one of the people in the circles because kids will talk to you and you find out someone's grandpa's sick or someone passed away or something's hard. And they know that I will advocate for them and I'll talk to other teachers if it's appropriate and I need to about the math test or whatever. And so it's a game changer. It's amazing. I can't say enough about it. When I was introduced to circles in 2016, it really changed my classroom. I don't did answer the question.
Carolee, that was great. And you're going to find us something that I can put on the site and share with them. Yay.
Okay, I will. I give you articles.
Yay. Yes, that would be wonderful. So come back when we send the follow-up email, we will come back to the site so that way you can, we'll add it there so you can just read some of the great approaches that Carolee takes. And take a moment right now. We will be sending out a follow-up and a copy of the recording. It usually takes us a day or two to get it all together, but we will send that out afterwards. If you scroll down on the landing site for today, as we wrap up, you'll see that there's a spot for reflection. Take a moment, think about what you're taking away from Carolee's conversation. Think about how you can use that space of circles, or that sense of community to talk about current events and then connect it back to the content that's happening. Okay, and seeing how that begins to toggle back and forth as you think about this different content in history and how it applies and makes connections to today's. I think it's also wonderful to think about. Many of us are wrapping up our school year now, but think about how you can take the concept of a circle, the concept of making the connection between the past and the present into next school year. Okay. I know you're going to go on summer break and you're going to relax, but we know you're thinking. So on that note, take a moment and we'll make sure to share all of these links from the chat too, Annie. We got you there. So share just any reflections that you have with Carolee. And as we close out today, I'm going to share my screen one more time. And forgive me for going a minute over one of these days. It's our last day, so it takes me an extra moment. And I am going to go ahead and speed through these. Carolee talked about these. Wonderful. And so those of you who have never been to the website, definitely take a moment. Robert, you're really lucky that you wrapped up 4 weeks ago. Those of us in New England, we're still in school. educatingforamericandemocracy.org. If you haven't checked out the website yet, definitely go ahead and do that. You'll be able to download all the resources there, download the report, and that's also where you can find our interactive roadmap where you can kind of toggle between the questions that is there in that space. You also have Educator Resources. The great thing about these Educator Resources is they've been vetted by a team of educators. A task force came together, and with that, you can sort by grade level, content theme, you name it, you can do it. And then there's several resources across K-12. I know we always have some elementary people with us, but definitely go take a glance, see what is there. And as you are signing off for today, please make sure to take some time to complete the exit ticket. If you've been with us for several sessions throughout the series, tell us what you love, tell us what you would love to see in the future, and we will definitely work on that, because we have a whole new opportunity come the fall again, and actually come starting August. And as we close out, as you're doing your exit ticket, I always like to remind us, as we think about the important work of EAD, just reminding us that when we're talking about EAD, we're talking about 60 million students, 100,000 schools, and 1 million teachers really having the opportunity to engage in this rich history and civic learning through an inquiry approach. So we just keeping that on our core, and all of you taking the time to join this conversation really helps to continue that. And finally, if you want to know what you can do, what else you can do, kind of share the roadmap with your network, explore the resources on the website, just continue the dialogue. This is the end of this series, but it will not be the end of the series for future PDs. We will have those coming up again. So just keep that in mind, come back and join us. And on that note, I just want to say a huge thank you to Dawn, Carolee, and to Carolee taking the time to join us this evening, sharing your expertise, sharing your thoughts, ideas, and opinions. And we really, truly appreciate it. And thank you to all of you for joining us and just participating in the discussion. We really appreciate it. And this is how we learn best, building off of each other. So thank you, everyone. Take your time to do your exit ticket. And I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. Take care, everyone.